He handcuffed her in front of a full bakery at 8:14 in the morning, not in a back alley, not on a dark street. In a warm, bright cafe on Caldwell Street in Harlow, Georgia, where the Edison bulbs glowed amber and the espresso machine hummed and 20 people sat with their lattes and their laptops and watched it happen. She was sitting in the corner. A black woman in a charcoal blazer, natural hair close-cropped, holding a coffee cup with both hands and looking out at the street. That was it. That was the reason. He walked in, stopped at her table, and when she did not perform the deference he expected when she answered his questions with the calm, measured voice of a woman who has answered questions like that 1,000 times and stopped apologizing for existing about 9 years ago. He reached into her blazer, pulled out her badge, wallet, looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and dropped it into a puddle of spilled tea on the counter. He held it by 2 fingers, like something he did not want touching his skin. "Nice prop," he said. "Where did you order it?" Nobody in that room said a word. A few people looked away. He snapped the first cuff onto her wrist in front of all of them, and she looked up, not at him, at the security camera above the chalkboard menu. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been waiting for, the way a woman looks when the thing she prepared for finally arrives exactly as expected. Because what Officer Dale Mercer did not know what would cost him everything. 54 days later, in a federal courtroom in Atlanta, was that the small gold brooch on the lapel of her blazer had been recording since 7:52 that morning. Every word, every sneer, every syllable of every lie he told in that bakery, and every word he and his chief would speak that same afternoon behind a closed door in a room they believed was private. Crystal clear, encrypted, intact. "Stay with this one. You are going to want to see exactly how it ends." Her name was Dr. Naomi Ellison. She was 51 years old, and she carried herself with the particular posture of someone who has spent 3 decades in rooms that tried to break her and discovered over and over again that they could not. Not because she was hard, not because she was cold or unfeeling or disconnected from the world around her, because she was precise. There is a difference between a person who has survived something and a person who has converted it into fuel so completely that they no longer smell the smoke, who has taken every obstacle, every dismissal, every door closed in their face, and used it to build something more durable than the door itself. Naomi Ellison was the second kind. She was the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, one of 6 people in the country who held that specific title, the only black woman among them. She had not arrived at that position through any particular fortune or connection. She had not been handed anything. She had arrived the way she arrived at everything in her life. Methodically, step by step. With the long patience of someone who understands that the work is the point, not the recognition, not the title, not the moment when someone finally admits they were wrong about you. She had paid a cost she had calculated in advance and paid in full without asking anyone to share the bill. Her record spoke in numbers, and the numbers did not require commentary. In 2017, she led a 14-month undercover operation that dismantled a contractor bribery ring in Birmingham, Alabama. 9 indictments on a single Tuesday morning before any of the accused had the chance to coordinate a story, before a single phone call could be made, before anyone in the ring had any idea that the walls they thought were solid had been crumbling for over a year. In 2020, she built and executed the prosecution of a sitting state senator in Raleigh, North Carolina, who had been accepting campaign kickbacks from a private prison developer for 7 consecutive years. The senator had believed with the particular confidence of a man who has never been seriously challenged that he was untouchable. He had been wrong about that. Wrong in the specific, irreversible, permanent way that people are wrong when Naomi Ellison has spent 16 months building a case against them. When she is done, there is nothing left to argue. There is only what she has already documented, already proven, already delivered into the hands of people who will act on it. She had testified 3 times before the Senate Judiciary Committee under cross-examination, specifically engineered to rattle her, to make her contradict herself, to make her lose her composure, to make her angry enough to say something they could use. She had not given them a single word, not once, not ever. She was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most accomplished federal law enforcement officers in the country. On the morning of Wednesday, October 9th, what she wanted was a cup of coffee and 20 minutes of quiet before a 9 o'clock briefing with U.S. Attorney Patricia Greer. They had a wire fraud case 22 months in the making, a real estate development company that had been quietly, methodically defrauding municipal pension funds across 3 Georgia counties. School teachers, firefighters, city workers, people who had paid into those funds their entire working lives and had no idea the money was being siphoned away. The grand jury indictment was sealed and ready to file. Today was supposed to be a good day. The kind of day that makes 22 months feel worthwhile. The kind of day you remember years later as the moment something broken finally got fixed. She pulled her government-issued Suburban to the curb on Caldwell Street at 7:53 and sat for a moment with the engine off looking through the windshield at the town. Harlow, Georgia, the kind of suburb where the sidewalks got pressure-washed every spring, where the flower beds outside the bank rotated with the seasons, where the trees lining the main streets had been trimmed to a uniformity that suggested someone had once consulted a diagram and found it satisfying. The oaks along Caldwell had just started their October turn, leaves going amber at the edges. The air through the window was cold and clean, carrying that particular October smell, like something ending gracefully, like something that knows how to leave well. Before she stepped out, she did one thing. She reached up and touched the small gold brooch pinned to the lapel of her blazer. A bar pin brushed gold, the kind a professional woman might wear to a morning meeting without anyone looking at it twice. What it was not was ordinary. It had been standard issue for agents at her level since 2019, manufactured in a Quantico technical workshop by a division that did not appear on any organizational chart available to the public. A division whose work did not get discussed at conferences or listed in budget reports. Inside the casing, a microphone array sensitive enough to capture a whispered conversation from across a quiet room through ambient noise through weather. An encrypted storage chip rated to 96 hours of continuous recording. A transmission buffer that had survived in controlled field tests, direct impact from a vehicle moving at highway speed, and submersion in 20 feet of water. She pressed the back of it once. A faint vibration, barely perceptible and visible to anyone watching, confirmed it was running. She was not expecting to need it today. She activated it every time she left the vehicle. The same way she checked her sidearm. The same way she noted exits when she entered a new room. The same way she cataloged the faces of strangers in unfamiliar places. Not paranoia, preparation. The kind that comes from 24 years of understanding that you never know when the moment arrives until it has already started. She locked the Suburban and walked toward Birchwood Bakery. The bakery occupied the ground floor of a converted brick building between a wine shop and a framing gallery, which told you everything you needed to know about this side of Harlow. The sign above the door was painted deep green. Through the front window, Edison bulbs glowed warm and amber against the gray October morning outside. The interior was the kind of carefully constructed coziness that costs significant money to achieve. Reclaimed wood floors, sealed and polished, exposed brick along the east wall. A chalkboard menu above the counter in deliberately imperfect handwriting. Acoustic music playing at a volume just low enough to seem accidental. At 7:45 on a Wednesday morning, the place was about 2/3 full. Women in expensive athletic wear. Men with noise-canceling headphones and open laptops. An older couple near the window, white-haired and unhurried, sharing a newspaper and a comfortable silence that required no performance. Naomi pushed open the glass door. The bell above it chimed softly. The ambient sound did not stop when she walked in, but it stuttered. A half-beat hesitation, collective and involuntary, the way a room adjusts when something unfamiliar enters its field. The young woman behind the counter looked up. Her name tag read, Deja. She was 24 years old, with dark braids pinned back and the careful, watchful eyes of someone who pays attention to things. Her smile came a quarter-second slower than it had for the customer ahead. A small hesitation, reflexive rather than hostile. The product of 24 years of navigating spaces that were designed with someone else in mind. Naomi cataloged it the way she cataloged everything. Quietly, without reaction, without judgment. Filed and set aside. She ordered black coffee, dark roast, and a blueberry scone. She took the corner table chosen for its sight lines to the door and the full length of the street, not for comfort. She checked her phone. A message from Patricia Greer, grand jury indictment sealed. Filing confirmed for this morning. Good work, Caldwell. She allowed herself one small sip of satisfaction. Then she set the phone face down and picked up her coffee. She had 51 minutes before she needed to be back in the Suburban. At the table nearest the window, an older white woman sat alone with a legal pad and a half-finished cup of tea. Her name was Margaret Osei. She was 68 years old, a retired federal public defender who had spent 30 years in the system, representing people at their worst moments, watching what happened in rooms when the power ran only one direction. She watched Naomi settle in at the corner table with the particular attention of someone who recognizes a specific kind of person on sight, not by title, not by what they are wearing, by how they carry what they know. Outside, through the front window, a Harlow Police Department cruiser turned slowly onto Caldwell Street and did not keep moving. Officer Dale Mercer was 41 years old. He had been with the Harlow Police Department for 11 years. Thick through the neck and shoulders in the way of a man who had been physically powerful once and was committed to preserving the physical memory of it, even as the body quietly, stubbornly moved on. He had played defensive end at a mid-level state college. That fact remained the organizing principle of his self-understanding, the peak of what he had been, which is a dangerous foundation to build a life on when the fact in question is 18 years in the past and the world has kept moving and the man himself has not. He understood the world in terms of territory and belonging. Who was in their right place? Who was not? It was a map he had drawn early, had never seriously revised, and had never been genuinely required to defend, because in Harlow, almost everyone who appeared on it fell exactly where he expected them to. His personnel file told a story he had never read in full. 12 excessive force complaints in 11 years. 9 of them involved Black or Latino civilians. Every single one had been reviewed and closed without a sustained finding by Lieutenant Gary Pruitt, who had been Mercer's patrol partner for his first 3 years on the force, who had stood beside him as best man at his wedding in 2009 and who had signed his name beneath every single exoneration with the steady, practiced hand of a man who does not allow himself to ask certain questions. Nobody in the Harlow Police Department had ever found this arrangement worth examining. Nobody had ever tried. Nobody had ever sat down with the file, looked at the pattern, and said out loud what the pattern clearly said. By the time Mercer turned onto Caldwell Street that morning, his patrol had produced 1 noise complaint from a retired orthodontist and a minor fender bender near the highway on-ramp. He felt on mornings like this one not like an officer, not like someone whose presence made the neighborhood safer, like a prop, seasonal, ornamental. He glanced through the front window of Birchwood Bakery as his cruiser rolled past. The regulars, the laptop crowd, the retired couples. He knew their cars. He knew their rhythms. He knew this block the way a man knows a place he has decided to be responsible for without being asked. And then he saw her, a woman he did not know. Black, alone at the corner table, natural hair, professional blazer. The posture of someone entirely at ease in her own body. She was looking out at the street with a quality of stillness that registered to Mercer not as composure, not as the ordinary calm of a woman having coffee before a meeting, but as something that required explanation. The reaction was not a thought. It happened below the level of reasoning. In the part of the mind that fires before logic can moderate it, does not belong. Waiting for something she is not showing. He did not run the plates on the dark Suburban at the curb. That would have taken 45 seconds and produced a result he was not prepared to process. He did not call it in. He did not wait for an infraction, a signal, a reason. He parked. He adjusted his belt. And he was at the door of Birchwood Bakery before he had fully formed a plan. His hand was on his baton before he had taken 3 steps inside. The cafe went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something is about to happen and everyone senses it before anyone can name it. The espresso machine completed its cycle. The music kept playing at its low, careful volume, but the conversation dropped 2 full registers and every person in Birchwood Bakery tracked the officer moving through the tables without being seen to look. Deja behind the counter set down the cup she was holding. Both palms went flat on the cold surface. She did not move. Her eyes tracked Mercer with the stillness of a young woman who has learned that the worst thing you can do in a moment like this is draw attention to the fact that you are watching. At her table near the window, Margaret Osei set her tea down and looked up. She watched Mercer's trajectory across the floor, and her face arranged itself into an expression that people who have spent their lives in courtrooms recognize immediately. The expression of someone who sees exactly what is about to happen. Who knows with a specific and exhausting certainty that they have seen it before. Who is deciding in real time what they are going to do about it. Mercer stopped at Naomi's table. His shadow fell across her phone screen. Naomi waited 3 seconds. Then she set the phone face down. She looked up, completely neutral, not hostile, not apologetic, not afraid. Present, paying full attention and giving him absolutely nothing he had not earned. "Can I help you, officer?" Mercer stood over her with his thumbs hooked in his vest, using his bulk the way he always used it as an opening argument, as a physical claim on the space between them that preceded anything he might actually say. "You live in this area?" Naomi looked at him steadily. "I don't see how that's relevant. I'm a paying customer having breakfast. I didn't ask if you were a customer. I asked if you live here. And I told you it isn't relevant." Her voice was entirely even. No heat, no edge, no apology. The tone of a woman who has answered questions like this before and has long since stopped performing deference she does not feel. Mercer shifted his weight. He tried the standard angle, the one that had worked 100 times in 11 years without requiring much thought. "We've had some calls. Reports of someone matching your description sitting in local businesses for extended periods, making other customers uncomfortable." Naomi let the sentence finish completely. She let a moment breathe around it. Then, matching my description, she said it quietly. The words landed with the precision of something dropped from a height. A black woman in a blazer eating a scone at 8 in the morning. At the table to her left, Margaret Osei pressed her lips together hard. The sound she suppressed was brief and involuntary. The sound of a woman who has spent 30 years watching certain things happen and who is watching one of them happen 3 feet away. Her hand moved to her phone on the table. She did not pick it up yet, but her fingers were on it. Mercer's face flushed dark from the collar upward. The embarrassment arrived first. Then it hardened into something else with a speed that had become reflex. The accelerant of a man who has never once been required to stop. "Stand up," he said. "I need to see some identification." Naomi looked at him. "I have not been informed of the basis for any detention. I have not been told of any crime. I am not required to stand. She opened her blazer with one hand slowly, clearly, and displayed the badge wallet visible in the inside pocket. Right there, gold shield, federal seal, her name and title, visible to anyone who was looking. Mercer reached into her blazer and took it. He held it at arm's length, turned it over, studied it with the exaggerated skepticism of a man who has already decided the verdict and is simply performing the examination for the room. Then he walked to the counter. He set it down at the edge and dropped it into the puddle of spilled tea. He held it by 2 fingers and let it fall. The way you drop something you have decided is worthless. The way you drop something when you want the person watching to understand exactly what you think of them. Nice prop, he said, loud enough for the room. Where did you order it? Amazon 5-star reviews. The bakery went very still. Behind the counter, Deja's hand moved off the surface. Her phone was in her palm. She angled it toward the corner table and pressed record without looking down, without a change in her expression, without a single visible sign of what she was doing. Margaret Osei had been recording for 38 seconds. Mercer turned back to Naomi. You are being detained for impersonating a federal officer. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Naomi stood, slowly, completely without haste, without the flinch or the hurry or the anxious compliance he had been relying on. Before her hands went behind her back, she looked up at the security camera mounted above the chalkboard menu. She looked at it the way a woman looks at something she has been depending on, without telling anyone. The way a person looks when the trap is already set and the door has just swung shut. Steady, certain, satisfied. Then she put her hands behind her back and let Dale Mercer put the handcuffs on her. The cuffs clicked into place in a bakery full of witnesses. Mercer was not quiet about it. He announced the charge loud enough for the room using language that was imprecise and aggressive. The language of a man who has confused volume with authority for so long he no longer notices the difference. He radioed for a backup unit. The description he gave bore no resemblance to any genuine emergency. He conducted a search of her blazer without consent, without legal basis, without pausing to ask himself whether any of this was right. In the inside pocket, he found a second credential wallet, a Department of Justice Civil Rights Division card, a card for the U.S. Attorney's Northern District Office with Patricia Greer's direct line printed at the bottom. He looked at them for a moment, then pocketed both without logging them. He walked Naomi Ellison toward the door of Birchwood Bakery in handcuffs, past Deja, still recording, face unchanged, past Margaret Osei, whose phone had not moved from its position, who watched Naomi move toward the door with the expression of a woman who has already decided what she is going to do as soon as that door closes, past the retired couple by the window who had not moved, who had not said a word, whose faces were visible in the footage. Outside, the morning air was cold. Naomi moved across the sidewalk to the cruiser with her back straight and her head level. As Mercer's hand pressed down on the top of her head to guide her into the back seat, she pressed the back of her brooch against the doorframe. One press, faint vibration. The file was intact. The chip was saving. The recording had not been interrupted. The door closed. Mercer started the engine and pulled out onto Caldwell Street. Naomi settled back against the cracked vinyl. She pressed the brooch again through the fabric of her blazer. Confirmed. Running. Then she pulled out her phone, which Mercer had not confiscated, and typed 2 words to Patricia Greer. Birchwood now. She set the phone face down on the seat beside her and looked out the scratched plexiglass at the street moving past. She thought about her daughter Simone, 17 years old, dark-skinned like her mother, who drives to her internship 3 mornings a week through the east side of Harlow, who passes patrol cars like this one. Naomi had sat with her the night she got her learner's permit. They had been at the kitchen table. Simone had her new license in her hand, running her thumb over her own photo, and Naomi had started to speak. She had used specific, concrete language. What to say. What not to say. Where to keep your hands. What to do if they ask you to step out. What to do if you are frightened and no one around you is doing anything about it. At the end, Simone had looked up from the license. "Mom, I already know," in the voice of a girl who had figured it out years before anyone told her officially, who had been watching it accumulate her entire life, who had absorbed it from conversations adults had when they thought the children were not listening. She already knew. She had known before anyone sat her down to explain it. Naomi held that for a moment. Let it settle. Let it be what it was. Then she put it in the place she had learned to put things like that. Not away. You cannot put it away, but to the side, where it can wait without consuming everything around it. There was work to do. The back seat of Mercer's cruiser smelled of industrial disinfectant, and something underneath it, older and darker, the accumulated residue of fear that no cleaning product fully removes. The vinyl was cracked along the seam. The plexiglass divider was scratched and slightly yellowed, softening everything on the other side into shapes without sharp edges. Mercer tried the partition. His voice had thinned since the bakery. The swagger had not disappeared, but it had become quieter. "Listen. If there has been some kind of mix-up, if you want to explain the ID situation before we get inside, maybe we can handle this without things going further." Naomi did not turn her head. "You are under the impression that this is a negotiation. It is not. Everything you say to me from this moment forward is evidence. I would recommend silence." Mercer hit the steering wheel with his palm. A hollow, unsatisfying sound. They turned into the station lot. 3 black government Suburbans were already pulling in from the opposite entrance, moving with the unhurried coordination of vehicles driven by people who have nowhere urgent to be because they have already arrived. Mercer looked at them in his mirror. Something in his jaw tightened. Naomi looked out the window at the concrete face of the building. She thought about nothing in particular. The way a woman thinks about nothing when every decision that matters has already been made. The booking area of the Harlow Police Department smelled of burnt coffee and institutional soap and something papery and faintly stale, the accumulated atmosphere of a room where bad days are processed into paperwork. Fluorescent tubes gave everything a quality of light that was technically adequate and aesthetically bleak. The desk sergeant was Walter Delaney, 53 years old, 27 years at that desk. A man who had developed over those decades a very specific instinct, the kind you cannot teach in a classroom. The difference between a person who has been brought in and a person who has chosen to walk through the door on purpose. He looked up when Mercer pushed Naomi through the entrance. He took in the blazer, the posture, the quality of stillness in her expression. Not the stillness of defeat, not the stillness of fear. The stillness of a person who is entirely in control of herself and of considerably more than that. The stillness of someone who arrived here on purpose. 27 years had taught him to recognize it. He set down his coffee mug very carefully. He did not pick it up again. Mercer announced the booking in the clipped, compressed tone of a man holding something together through effort alone. Detaining, resisting, impersonating a federal officer. Delaney looked at the blazer again. The face, the specific quality of calm. Then he looked at the lobby monitor. The screen showed the front entrance in real time. U.S. Attorney Patricia Greer was at the reception desk. Her credentials were out before she had finished moving through the door. Her voice was carrying through 2 sets of walls at a volume that was pressing the duty receptionist toward the back wall. Behind her, a woman in a dark suit was already on her phone. Not explaining, not pleading, making the calls that people make when they know exactly which numbers to dial and in what order and what those calls will set in motion. Through the lobby glass, a news van was parking on Westfield Avenue, then a second, then a third. Delaney looked at Mercer, then back at the screen, then back at Naomi. He picked up his radio. The steel door at the end of the corridor opened, and Chief Raymond Polk came through it, moving faster than his usual deliberate pace. Raymond Polk was 58 years old. He had been chief for 9 years. His preferred mode of movement communicated at all times that everything was entirely under control. He was not moving that way now. He swept the room in one long look. The blazer, the cuffs, the agents visible through the lobby glass, the news vans multiplying at the curb, Greer's voice carrying through 2 walls. He looked at Mercer. "Take those cuffs off her." Low, each word its own complete sentence. "Chief, she was resist. The Illinois Attorney General is on hold. The governor's office has called twice. Take them off." Mercer fumbled for his keys. Found them. Dropped them. They hit the linoleum with a sharp clatter and slid across the polished floor, coming to rest near Naomi's shoe. She looked down at them, then up at Mercer. She did not move her foot. He bent down and retrieved them with hands that were visibly trembling. The cuffs came off. Naomi pressed the back of her brooch once. The faint vibration confirmed the file was intact. 51 minutes of audio. Preserved. Intact. On an encrypted chip that neither Mercer nor Polk nor anyone else in that building knew existed. She rolled her wrists once. Then she looked at Polk. "I will need those cuffs bagged as evidence, tagged with the time and Officer Mercer's badge number." Her voice did not rise. "I don't want coffee, Chief. I don't want an apology. I want the full booking process on the record. Every form, every camera, every log entry as it currently stands. And I want Officer Mercer in the squad room writing his incident report before his union representative answers the phone." Polk's political smile materialized from muscle memory, smooth, practiced, no longer connected to anything real behind it. "Agent Ellison, I am deeply—" "Interrogation room, Chief." She turned toward the corridor. "After you." The interrogation room was painted the institutional beige of rooms designed to communicate the absence of comfort. Cinderblock walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, one lower than the other, an overhead camera with a steady red light. Naomi sat in the suspect's chair. She chose it deliberately. She crossed one leg over the other, settled her hands in her lap, and looked at Polk with the patient attention of a woman who has nowhere else to be. Polk began the apology. It was well constructed. He had given versions of it before. The acknowledgement without admission. The concern without liability. The regret without cause. Naomi let him finish every word. Then she placed a single sheet of paper on the table. Mercer's service record, pulled from the federal database on her phone during the ride to the station. 12 excessive force complaints in 11 years. 9 involving Black or Latino civilians. 0 sustained findings. Every single exoneration signed by Lieutenant Gary Pruitt, who was Mercer's patrol partner for his first 3 years, who stood beside him at his wedding in 2009, and who remains the only internal affairs officer in a department of 38. Something moved through Polk's face. A flicker, controlled quickly, suppressed, but visible to someone watching for it. Internal affairs is an independent. Internal affairs in this department is 1 lieutenant and 2 part-time administrators. That lieutenant attended the arresting officer's wedding. She paused. My team in Atlanta pulled his full file within 20 minutes of my call from the back of that cruiser. We are thorough, Chief. We have always been thorough. The meeting lasted 14 minutes. When Naomi walked out, Polk closed the interrogation room door behind her. He stood alone for a moment, staring at the surface of the metal table. Then he went and found Mercer. He closed his office door. He drew the blinds. He turned off his body camera. He opened his administrative terminal. Tell me everything, he said. All of it. Nothing left out. Mercer told him every detail, every exchange. From the window of the cruiser to the interrogation room door closing. When he finished, Polk was quiet for a long time. Then he opened the CAD system using his administrative credentials, the ones that gave him access to every log the department had ever produced. His fingers moved over the keyboard with the steady deliberation of a man talking himself down from a ledge while insisting the ground beneath him is level. He created a new entry, call type suspicious person. Anonymous caller reports black female acting erratically refusing to leave premises. Possible disturbance. He set the timestamp to 7:49 in the morning. 23 minutes before Naomi had parked on Caldwell Street. 64 minutes before Mercer had ever turned onto that block. He hit enter. The entry slotted into the dispatch timeline, sitting between real calls on either side, formatted identically, invisible against the morning's legitimate record. Mercer stared at the screen. "It looks real. It is real now," Polk said. He leaned back. The exhale he released carried no relief. When her attorney subpoenas the logs, this is what he finds. A welfare check. You were responding to a concerned citizen. No jury convicts on a welfare check. What neither man in that room knew what they could not have known was that Naomi's gold brooch was sitting in a clear plastic evidence bag on Walt Delaney's booking counter 11 feet from the glass partition of Polk's office wall. The partition was 3/8 of an inch of standard interior glass. The brooch's microphone array had been calibrated to capture clean audio through precisely this type of material at distances of up to 25 feet. It had been recording since 7:52 that morning. It was recording Polk's voice right now, every word, crystal clear, preserved on an encrypted chip that neither man would know about until it was far, far too late. The footage surfaced within hours, not one angle, 3. Deja's phone had captured the full confrontation from the moment Mercer entered the bakery. His approach across the floor. The badge wallet being held by 2 fingers and dropped into the spilled tea. The handcuffs clicking into place. The walk to the door. She had driven to the FBI field office in Atlanta on her lunch break that same day. She had handed over a USB drive in person and submitted a 4-page written statement typed the night before on her laptop, single-spaced with timestamps describing everything she had witnessed from behind the counter. She was 24 years old. She had done it without being asked, without a lawyer, without telling anyone. She returned to work, clocked back in 2 minutes before her break ended, and said nothing about it to anyone for the rest of the shift. Margaret Osei submitted her footage through her former colleague at the Federal Public Defender's Office by 2 that afternoon. 63 seconds of clean, steady video, shot with the hands of a woman who spent 30 years managing chaos in overlit rooms and knows how to hold a phone still under pressure. The bakery's security system, 4 high-definition cameras at the corners of the room, captured everything in crisp, unambiguous detail from angles that left no room for alternative interpretation. By 6 that evening, all 3 sources were in federal hands. By 9, the clip of Mercer dropping the badge wallet into the puddle had been viewed 400,000 times online. By midnight, over 1 million. Cable news ran the clip 38 times in a single broadcast. One anchor played it on a loop without commentary for 45 seconds and then simply sat quietly for a moment before speaking. The Harlow PD Union issued its statement on day 3. Officer Mercer responded appropriately to a reported disturbance. The statement was released at 9 in the morning. By 9:45, 4 retired federal prosecutors had appeared on separate networks to explain in precise and patient detail exactly how many things in that statement were factually incorrect. Polk gave one interview. A local anchor he had known for 12 years on a station where the questions were unlikely to draw blood. He used the phrase breakdown in communication 5 times in 7 minutes. He was not challenged on a single one. He went home that night and slept soundly. Mercer stopped checking the news by day 10. His union lawyer had called twice with the same message. The log is airtight. The welfare check framing is solid. Just stay quiet and let the process work. He began to believe it. On a Tuesday of the 3rd week, he wrote 2 parking tickets and laughed at something a younger officer said in the break room. He went home, had a beer, watched the game, went to bed before 11. The specific, dangerous return of something resembling normal. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Marcus Webb's forensic technology team had completed its analysis of the Harlow PD's dispatch server 48 hours earlier. Marcus Webb was a civil rights attorney based in Atlanta. He occupied the 31st floor of a glass tower on Peachtree Street. 23 years of practice. A reputation that had a way of making city attorneys check their liability coverage before they returned calls. He had filed his appearance in Ellison versus City of Harlow on day 12. Filed it himself, not delegated a word of it. U.S. Attorney Patricia Greer had opened the formal civil rights investigation into the Harlow PD retroactive to the earliest complaint on Mercer's file the same day. The pattern document that Naomi's team produced was 53 pages long. It cross-referenced 11 years of complaint dates with Pruitt's exoneration signatures and produced a statistical analysis so clean and so complete that 3 separate federal prosecutors who reviewed it said the same thing in 3 different ways. This is not coincidence, this is a structure. This has been operating for years. Webb subpoenaed the complete dispatch logs on day 14. His forensic technology team completed its analysis of the Harlow PD's computer-aided dispatch server under federal subpoena in the 3rd week. 51 pages. Tabbed. Color-coded. Server metadata showing the exact keystrokes, the exact credential login, the exact modification timestamp. A log entry created at 11:17 in the morning using Chief Raymond Polk's administrative credentials with a timestamp manually adjusted to 7:49 in the morning. Created 88 minutes after Naomi Ellison was already in the building. After the cuffs were off. After the interrogation room meeting was over. After everything was already documented, photographed, and in federal hands. Webb sealed the report in a folder. It would be opened on a Tuesday morning in a conference room 31 floors above Peachtree Street. 5 weeks after a woman in a gold brooch had looked up at a security camera above a bakery chalkboard menu and pressed the back of a lapel pin to confirm that the recording was intact. Polk attended a county business association dinner that Friday, shook hands with the county commissioner, had the salmon, finished 2 glasses of wine, slept soundly. He did not know what Tuesday would bring. The conference room at Webb & Associates occupied the full south corner of the 31st floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. An unobstructed view of the Atlanta skyline on a clear November morning. A mahogany table 14 feet long. Chairs on one side set 2 inches lower than the other, the difference barely perceptible and entirely deliberate. Mercer and Polk sat on the lower side. Between them, Sandra Rowe, the Harlow City attorney, 56 years old, a woman who had spent her career managing problems that were by definition containable. She had a legal pad, a pen she had not stopped clicking for 9 days, and the pervasive smell of antacids that had followed her since the moment she first saw the footage. Across the table, Naomi Ellison and Marcus Webb. At the table's head, a court reporter, fingers poised. In the corner, a video camera's red light blinked with the patience of something that does not tire. Webb spent the first 20 minutes on background. Mercer's training record, his commendations, his disciplinary history, unhurried, methodical, building something whose architecture was not yet visible. Mercer answered smoothly. 5 weeks of reconstruction had assembled his confidence into something that almost felt like the original. The log was in discovery. Webb had already seen it. A welfare check before the stop. Clean, time-stamped, formatted identically. This was paperwork. Just paperwork. Officer Mercer Webb set both hands flat on the table. Let's talk about the morning of October 9th. Why did you enter Birchwood Bakery? I was responding to a dispatch call. Report of a black female acting erratically. Possible disturbance. Anonymous tip came across my terminal before I turned onto Caldwell Street, and you received this call before you entered the cafe. You did not enter based on personal judgment and construct a justification after the fact. Correct. I followed protocol. I received a call. I responded to it. Webb asked the same question 2 more times, rephrased each time. Mercer confirmed it under oath on the record with the steady jaw of a man whose lie had calcified into something that no longer felt like one. Then Webb turned to Polk. Chief Polk, you submitted the department's complete dispatch logs as part of discovery. Can you confirm those logs accurately reflect all calls received on October 9th, that no entries were created, modified, or backdated after the fact? Polk adjusted his cufflinks. I can confirm that I personally reviewed and submitted those logs. The call in question predates Officer Mercer's stop. Sandra Rowe stopped clicking her pen. The silence lasted 2 seconds. It had a texture, a density, the stillness of air before significant weather. She had been in enough rooms to recognize the feeling. She could not yet name its source. Her hand went still on the legal pad. Webb reached into his briefcase. The motion was entirely unhurried. He removed a USB drive. He also removed a bound document, 51 pages tabbed and color-coded, and placed both on the table with the deliberate care of a man who has been waiting a long time to set something down. I have here a forensic digital analysis of the Harlow Police Department's computer-aided dispatch server conducted under federal subpoena. The analysis identifies a log entry created at 11:17 in the morning on October 9th, using Chief Polk's administrative credentials with a timestamp manually adjusted to 7:49 in the morning. He let that sit in the room for 4 full seconds. But more relevantly, Webb plugged the USB into the laptop. He turned up the volume. Polk's voice filled the conference room. Clean. Unmistakable. Without distortion. The audio quality of a recording made 11 feet from a state-of-the-art microphone array through 3/8 of an inch of standard interior glass. When her attorney subpoenas the logs, this is what he finds. A welfare check. No jury convicts on that. Then Mercer's voice. It looks real. Then Polk's voice, flat and decisive with the certainty of a man who has crossed a line and chosen not to look back. It is real now. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was not the polite silence of a pause. It was the silence of a room from which all the oxygen has been removed. The court reporter's fingers had stopped. She was looking at the table. Sandra Rowe pushed her legal pad away from herself. A small involuntary gesture of dissociation. Her pen rolled off the edge and fell. She did not reach for it. Mercer was holding the edge of the conference table with both hands. The color had left his face so completely and so rapidly that the skin around his jaw had taken on a grayish cast. His mouth was open by a fraction of an inch. Nothing came out. Polk stared at Webb's laptop with the expression of a man watching something he trusted completely collapse without warning and without sound. His cufflinks caught the light. His hands were very still. Naomi had not moved. She had held the same posture for 93 minutes. Back straight, hands in her lap, face quiet and watching. She was looking at Polk with the patient attention of a woman who waited 5 weeks for this moment, and always knew with complete precision what it would look like when it arrived. Sandra Rowe stood. Her chair scraped back hard. I need a recess. I need to call the mayor right now. Number. Naomi said at once. She stood. She walked around the end of the table. Not quickly, not with any performance of drama. With the same unhurried certainty with which she has moved through every room of her professional life for 24 years. She stopped near the center of the room. The conference room door opened. 4 FBI agents walked in. Dark suits, no tactical gear, no weapons drawn. Their faces performing nothing. They took up positions with the calm efficiency of people who are very good at their jobs and who are at this particular moment personally offended on behalf of someone they respect. Mercer stood so fast his chair hit the credenza behind him. Qualified immunity. You cannot. Naomi stepped toward him. She stopped 3 feet away. She looked at the man who had dropped her badge into a puddle of tea and called it an Amazon prop in front of a room full of people. She said what she had known for 5 weeks she would eventually say. Qualified immunity protects officers from civil liability for good faith errors committed in the performance of their duties. It has never, not once in the entire history of its application, shielded any person from federal criminal prosecution for felonies that are recorded, documented, and proven beyond any reasonable doubt. She held his eyes. You wanted to make an arrest on October 9th, Officer Mercer. A pause. You made one today. The agents moved in. Mercer was handcuffed at the conference table on camera, the court reporter's fingers moving again, capturing every word. He did not resist. He stood with his hands behind his back and stared at the surface of the mahogany table, as though he was trying to find something in the grain of the wood that would explain how he had arrived here. Polk was cuffed without resistance. He had moved past resistance into an inert, exhausted stillness that looked like composure from a distance but was the complete absence of any viable alternative. The lead agent placed a warrant in front of Sandra Rowe. Webb looked at her. $5.2 million. Federal consent decree. Bureau of Justice Statistics oversight of the Harlow Police Department. Minimum 5 years. You have until 5 o'clock to call the mayor. Sandra Rowe's voice when it came was barely audible. I'll draft the check. The federal courthouse in Harlow was packed to capacity for sentencing. The press gallery was full. The public gallery stood at the back. Citizens of Harlow who had driven past the same patrol car for 11 years without once asking what it was doing in that particular spot, without once looking at a complaint record, without once asking why the same officer kept appearing in the same kinds of incidents with the same kinds of outcomes. They were here now. The change in the 2 men at the defense table was stark enough to constitute its own statement. Mercer had lost 17 pounds in pre-trial confinement. His civilian suit, the best one he owned, was too large at the shoulders. He sat with his hands folded, and his hands were not steady. He had aged in the specific way of a man from whom the badge, the uniform, the 11 years of institutional armor have been removed all at once, leaving only what was always underneath. Polk sat very still, not the stillness of composure, the stillness of exhaustion. Judge Clara Moss entered without ceremony. 17 years on the federal bench. Her reputation built on one consistent principle: the degree of trust placed in a public official is the precise measure of the offense committed. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at her papers. Then she looked at the 2 men at the defense table with the unhurried attention of a woman who has made difficult decisions for 2 decades and has never once confused difficulty with doubt. She looked at Mercer first. You were issued a badge, a uniform, and the sworn authority of the state of Georgia. On the morning of October 9th, you chose to use that authority as an instrument of personal prejudice. You did not stop Dr. Ellison because she had done anything wrong. You stopped her because the combination of her race, her bearing, and her presence in a neighborhood you had appointed yourself to gatekeep offended a conviction you have carried by the evidence of your own conduct record for the entirety of your career. Mercer looked at the table. A muscle in his jaw moved. The judge's voice had not raised. If anything, it had dropped. The way a voice drops when the words no longer require volume to carry weight. You did not make a mistake in that bakery. A mistake implies a departure from your values. 12 complaints in 11 years of documented conduct demonstrate that you acted in perfect accordance with them. The mistake belonged to every institution that allowed those values to carry a badge for 11 years without consequence. She looked at her papers. For deprivation of civil rights under color of law and conspiracy to obstruct federal justice, 132 months in federal custody. No possibility of early release, 11 years. Mercer's son was 8 years old. His daughter was 12. He would be released if sentencing proceeded as structured when his daughter was 23. He did the arithmetic behind his eyes. The arithmetic was not survivable. Judge Moss turned to Polk. "You occupied a position of greater responsibility than the man beside you. You were not blind to who Officer Mercer was. You were his shield for 11 years. And when the consequences of his conduct threatened to reach you, your response was to fabricate federal records, coach your subordinate in the commission of additional felonies, and lie about all of it under oath on camera in front of a court reporter. For conspiracy, obstruction of federal justice, and perjury, 168 months in federal custody. No parole, 14 years. Polk received it without visible reaction. The mechanism that had run his public face for a decade produced nothing now except blankness. As Mercer was walked toward the exit, he looked across the courtroom at Naomi seated in the front row, a folder open in her lap, reading the next thing. He looked at her for a long moment. The aggression was gone. The territorial certainty was gone. The 11 years of institutional armor was gone. What remained was something simpler and considerably worse. The hollow bewilderment of a man who had genuinely never believed this specific outcome was possible for him. The marshal's hand closed on his arm. "Move it." The word landed the way it was designed to. A reclassification, complete and final. The man who had called a federal agent a prop in a bakery on Caldwell Street was now a number in a federal system, and the system had no interest in the 11 years he had spent believing himself exempt from it. Naomi turned the page in her folder. There was work to do. The city of Harlow's liability insurer invoked the willful misconduct exclusion. The fabrication of federal records, documented and proven and recorded, placed the settlement outside any contractual obligation to cover. $4.7 million, coming directly from the general fund. The mayor read the resulting budget cuts from a prepared statement with the grim, precise delivery of a man who has written difficult speeches before but never one this expensive. A new community center on Glenwood Avenue, 3 years in planning, fully designed and bid out, canceled entirely. The public library reduced to 4 operating days per week for a minimum of 3 years. Property taxes increased 3.2% annually for 5 consecutive years. The people in that council chamber who had driven past the same patrol car for 11 years without once asking what it was doing, without looking at a complaint record, without once asking why the same officer kept appearing in the same kinds of incidents, felt for the first time the true and total cost of their indifference. $389 per household in the first year alone. Lieutenant Gary Pruitt resigned 3 days before the federal subpoena arrived for his records. It arrived anyway. Cooperation negotiations began immediately. Naomi did not keep the settlement. All $4.7 million transferred to the newly established Harlow Civil Liberties Defense Fund, incorporated under Georgia law, structured with the specific intention of permanence. 5 full-time civil rights attorneys. A forensic technology team capable of analyzing any use of force incident in the county within 72 hours. Annual independent audits of every department in the county published publicly without redaction. The endowment structured to generate operating income from interest in perpetuity. It would not need to fundraise. It would not depend on political goodwill. It would not require a sympathetic council or a favorable election cycle. It would simply be there every year for as long as anyone needed it. The organization's offices occupied a ground-floor storefront on Caldwell Street, 2 doors down from Birchwood Bakery. Empty for 14 months, freshly painted, windows clean for the first time in years. Above the entrance, mounted in large bronze letters to the stone facade, the Mercer-Polk Center for Civil Rights and Equal Justice. Every officer in the Harlow Police Department drives past that building on the way to the station. Every new recruit learns the names in their first week of orientation. Not as a cautionary tale delivered in a classroom, not as a slide in a presentation that gets clicked past, as letters in bronze above a door on the street where it all began, visible every morning, in every season, for as long as the building stands, She had not named it after them as cruelty. She understood precisely how it would feel to drive past it every morning. She was not sorry for that. She named it as architecture, permanent, public, unavoidable. A monument built from their own money, bearing their own names, serving the exact people they had tried to harm, standing on the street where they had made the decision that built it. Some lessons need a physical address. Deja became the center's first community intake coordinator. 24 years old. At her desk by 8 every Tuesday and Thursday. Yellow legal pad. Coffee from Birchwood 2 doors down. The quiet, practiced purpose of a woman who acted when no one asked her to and who intends to keep doing so. Margaret Osei trains legal observers on Friday mornings, 68 years old, 30 years watching what happens in rooms when no one is recording. She does not intend to stop. Weeks after the center opened, Naomi stopped at Birchwood Bakery on a Wednesday morning. Black coffee, dark roast, and a blueberry scone. The corner table, same chair, same angle. The same Edison bulb above the same exposed brick wall. She crossed her legs, settled her hands in her lap, and took the first sip. Through the window, the bronze letters of the center caught the November light 2 doors down. Deja was already at her desk inside, visible through the front window, moving through intake forms, with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows exactly where she is going and why. Naomi picked up her phone. She typed 6 words to her daughter, Simone. "It held, baby. It always holds." Simone's reply came in 9 seconds. "I knew it would. Love you, Mom." Naomi set the phone face down on the table. She picked up her scone. She looked out at Caldwell Street, at the bronze letters in the November light, at Deja moving through the center entrance with her stack of forms, at Margaret Osei's silhouette visible through the side window already reading. She thought about nothing in particular. The way a woman thinks about nothing when every decision that mattered has already been made well, and the work, the steady, necessary, unglamorous, essential work, simply continues. Outside on Caldwell Street, Deja looked up from her desk and saw Naomi through the cafe window. She gave her a nod, small, unhurried, serious, the kind that does not require elaboration, the kind that means I see you. I saw you then. I am still here. Naomi returned it with the same weight. Nobody in Birchwood stared. Nobody's conversation stuttered. The espresso machine completed its cycle. The morning moved through the window in the ordinary way of mornings that do not know they are being watched. Naomi Ellison did not save herself by being a federal agent. She saved herself by being prepared, documented, and refusing to disappear quietly. Most people in that bakery looked away. Deja did not. Margaret did not. Neither did the brooch. You do not need a badge to do what they did. You just need to decide not to look away. If this story hit you the way it hit me, please subscribe to our channel. More stories like this one are coming. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from. Because the street is still there. The bakery is still there. The cameras are still there. And so are the people behind them. There are people who walk into a room and immediately change its temperature. Not because they are loud. Not because they demand attention or wear something that commands it or say things designed to establish their standing before anyone has a chance to question it. But because something in the way they carry themselves, the set of the shoulders, the quality of the stillness, the eyes that move across a space and miss nothing communicate something that cannot be faked and cannot be taught. It is the product of years, decades, of rooms that tried to break them and did not. Dr. Naomi Ellison was that kind of person. She had not always been. That is the part people never tell you about people like her. She had been once a 23-year-old woman sitting in a federal building in Washington, D.C. for the first time in a suit she had bought on layaway from a department store in Memphis, Tennessee, because her mother had told her that you show up to important things dressed like you already belong in the room, even when every other signal in the room is telling you that you do not. She had been the only black woman in that hiring class. Not one of a few, the only one. She had noticed it immediately, cataloged it, filed it, and made a decision before the orientation was finished. She was going to be the best in the room. Not because she had something to prove. Because she had a job to do, and the job mattered, and doing it badly was not an option she was willing to entertain. 24 years later, she sat in the corner of a bakery in Harlow, Georgia, with a coffee and a scone and a sealed grand jury indictment waiting to file, and she looked out at a cold October street with the same certainty she had carried since that first morning in Washington. She knew exactly who she was. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was prepared for. What she did not know yet was that today was going to require everything she had prepared. Not the case, not the indictment. All of it. Every reflex built over 24 years of doing this work in rooms where the rules were stacked against her, and she had learned over time not to be surprised by that, but to use it. 11 feet from the glass partition of Raymond Polk's office, the gold brooch sat in its evidence bag on the surface of the booking counter, and the microphone inside it listened. It did not know what it was recording. It did not know that this would matter. It was a device. It was doing what it was designed to do. But the woman who had pressed it once that morning before leaving the Suburban, the woman who had touched it with the practiced reflex of someone who does this every day, who had not expected to need it today and had activated it anyway, because that was the rule she had made for herself, and she did not break her own rules, that woman knew. She had known when Mercer walked into the bakery. She had known when he stopped at her table. She had known when he reached for her badge wallet and held it by 2 fingers and let it drop. She had known what kind of man he was within 30 seconds of him entering the room. She had profiled enough people in enough rooms to read it the way a musician reads sheet music. Fast, fluent, without effort. A man who had never been seriously required to account for himself. A man who had been protected quietly and consistently by a system of informal arrangements that none of the participants had to acknowledge out loud because they all understood the arrangement without ever discussing it. She had known what he was going to do. What she had calculated in the 3 seconds between him stopping at her table and him demanding she stand was not whether to comply. She was going to comply. She had already decided that. What she calculated was how much of this she needed on record, and in what format, and through which channels, and in what sequence. She was not resisting, she was documenting. There is a difference. The difference is that when you resist, you give them the narrative they are looking for. You become the story. Your anger becomes the story. Your fear becomes the story. Whatever they decide to make of your response becomes the story. When you document, you become the witness. And witnesses in Naomi Ellison's experience had a way of surviving things that the people trying to remove them did not expect. The drive to the station had taken 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, Naomi had done 5 things. She had confirmed the brooch was recording. She had sent 2 words to Patricia Greer. She had pulled Mercer's personnel file from the federal database on her phone. She had read it in under 3 minutes, not because she read fast, though she did, but because the file confirmed what she had already assessed in the first 30 seconds of his approach. And she had thought about Simone, not for long, not in a way that consumed her, but enough to hold it and feel it and let it remind her of the precise and specific reason that everything she was about to do mattered beyond her own situation. Because Simone drove through Harlow 3 mornings a week. Because Simone was 17 and dark-skinned and moved through spaces that had not been designed with her in mind, the same way her mother had moved through them, the same way her grandmother had moved through them before that. And the work that Naomi Ellison did, every indictment she filed, every corrupt official she built a case against every room she walked into and did not leave until it was different from when she arrived, was connected in a direct and unbreakable line to the morning. Her daughter would not have to explain to her own daughter why she already knew. She wanted that morning to exist. She was building it, one case at a time, one document at a time, one recording at a time. The interrogation room had a specific smell. Every interrogation room in every police station in the country has a specific smell. It is the smell of fluorescent light and cheap cleaning solution, and the particular combination of anxiety and defeat that accumulates in a room where most of the people who sit in the suspect's chair are sitting there because they did not have the resources or the knowledge or the time to do anything other than be exactly where they were when the system decided to collect them. Naomi sat in the suspect's chair deliberately. She had thought for a fraction of a second about the other chair, the one with the better angle, the one where you sat when you were asking the questions. She chose the suspect's chair because she wanted every second of what happened in that room to be captured on the overhead camera with Polk in the asking position and her in the answering one. She wanted the visual record to be clean. She wanted when someone reviewed this footage later for there to be no ambiguity about what Polk was doing and what she was doing and what the difference was between them. Polk began the apology. She had heard versions of it before. It had a shape. It began with concern. It moved through acknowledgement. It arrived at an expression of regret that never quite got close enough to an admission to create any legal exposure. He was good at it. He had had 9 years of practice. Naomi let him say every word. Then she placed Mercer's file on the table and watched something move through Polk's face that he suppressed quickly, but not quickly enough. She knew in that moment that he was not going to let this go quietly. Men like Polk never did. That was the thing about people who had operated for years without being genuinely challenged. When the challenge finally arrived, they reached for the same tools they had always used. Control the record, shape the narrative, make the documentation say what they needed it to say. She was counting on it. The conference room on the 31st floor of Webb's building had been designed down to the last detail with a very specific psychology in mind. The chairs on one side lower than the other, the view of the skyline visible from only one angle, the mahogany table long enough that the distance between the two sides created a physical separation that reinforced the power dynamic before a single word had been spoken. Webb had built this room the way he built cases, with the understanding that everything communicates, that architecture is an argument, that when you walk into a deposition you have already started winning or losing before anyone opens their mouth depending on who sits where and what they can see from where they are sitting. He had won 83% of his cases. He did not attribute this to luck. Mercer sat on the lower side of the table and spent the first 20 minutes confirming under oath in a room designed to make him feel the weight of what he was doing, the version of events he had spent 5 weeks constructing. He was calm. He was composed. He believed the log was real. He had said those words enough times that they felt like memory. He did not know that the woman sitting across the table had been in that bakery's evidence bag listening through a glass partition on the afternoon he and his chief built the lie he was about to tell again under oath. He did not know that he had already been arrested. He just did not know it yet. The moment the recording began to play in that conference room, something changed in the air. Not because it was loud. It was not loud. The voices came through the laptop speakers at a clear, measured volume, filling the room without requiring anyone to strain to hear. What changed was something underneath the sound. The court reporter's fingers stopped. Not because she was told to stop. Because her hands had simply ceased to move the way hands stop when the mind has not yet processed what the ears are receiving. Sandra Rowe pushed her legal pad away from herself. A gesture so small and so involuntary that she almost certainly did not know she had made it. Mercer gripped the edge of the table with both hands, not because he was bracing for something physical, because his body had understood before his mind caught up that the floor he had been standing on for 5 weeks had just opened. Polk stared at the laptop. He was a man who had been the author of his own story for 9 years, who had controlled the record, who had shaped the narrative, who had known always which version of events would survive the morning because he was the one who decided which version of events the morning would see. He was watching the end of that, Not the dramatic, loud, obvious end that people imagine when they picture a powerful man being brought down. The quiet end. The end that happens when someone who prepared more carefully than you did simply places a document on a table and presses a button. The flat, irrefutable end. Naomi had held the same posture throughout. She had not leaned in when the recording played. She had not moved to watch their faces. She had watched. But she had done it without movement. The way a person watches who has already seen this before and knows exactly how it goes. When it was over, she stood. She did not move quickly. She moved with the same unhurried certainty with which she had moved through every room of her career. The certainty of a woman who has earned the right to take exactly as much time as she needs. She stopped near the center of the room and she said the words she had known for 5 weeks she would eventually say. And when the agents moved in, and the cuffs went on and Sandra Rowe's voice came through barely audible, "I'll draft the check." What Naomi Ellison felt was not triumph. She had learned a long time ago not to feel triumph. What she felt was the particular specific satisfaction of a job that took everything she had and that she had done without cutting a single corner. And then she turned the page in the folder she was holding, because there was always more work to do. There was always another case, another file, another room that needed someone to walk into it prepared. She had spent 24 years being that person. She intended to keep going. The bronze letters above the door of the Mercer-Polk Center caught the light on Caldwell Street in November, in the way that bronze always catches light when it has just been installed. Not warm yet, not worn yet, still new enough that it announced itself. Every officer in the Harlow Police Department drove past it on the way to the station. Some of them read it, some of them looked away, but they all knew what it said. They knew whose money had built it. They knew whose names were on it. They knew what the building inside it was for. And in their first week of orientation, every new recruit was told the story. Not to shame them, not to frighten them, but because some things need to be said out loud in a room full of people who are about to go out and represent something so that they understand what representation means and what it costs when it is done wrong. The story of the morning of October 9th in Harlow, Georgia. The woman in the corner table. The badge wallet dropped in the puddle. The brooch. The 51 pages of forensic analysis. The 41 minutes of audio captured through 3/8 of an inch of glass. The conference room on the 31st floor. The 2 men who sat on the lower side of the table and confirmed under oath a lie that had already been recorded. Some lessons need a physical address. This one had 2. The building on Caldwell Street 2 doors down from the bakery, and the federal facility where Mercer and Polk would spend the next decade. Naomi Ellison did not name the building to make them suffer. She named it because she understood after 24 years in this work that the only consequences that change behavior are the ones that cannot be ignored, that last in the room after the meeting is over, that sit in the chair beside you when you eat lunch, that ride in the car with you on the way to work in the morning. The letters in bronze above the door would be in the car with every Harlow officer from now until the building was gone. She was not sorry for that. She was, if anything, satisfied by the precision of it. The same way she was satisfied by the precision of a well-built case. The same way she was satisfied by the particular sound of a sealed indictment being filed. The satisfaction of something done correctly, of a consequence that fit, of a lesson that had a physical address. She had been the kind of student who read everything twice, not because she was slow, because she understood earlier than most that the first reading tells you what something says and the second reading tells you what it means. Her mother had a saying, "You do not get to choose whether the world is harder for you than it is for other people. You only get to choose whether that hardness makes you stronger or makes you stop." Naomi had made her choice at 14 and had not revisited it since. At 14, she had watched her father, a postal worker with 22 years of service and a spotless record, get passed over for a supervisory position that was given to a man with 11 years of service and 2 formal complaints in his file. Her father had not said much about it at home. He had gone to work the next Monday the same way he went every Monday. He had not become bitter in the way the story might suggest, but Naomi had watched him. She had watched the particular discipline it took to absorb something like that and keep moving. She had cataloged it, she had filed it, and she had decided that she was going to build something that the people who made those decisions would not be able to manage with a closed door and a phone call. She was going to build cases. She was going to build them so carefully, so thoroughly, so precisely that when she opened them in a room, there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain away, nothing left to quietly settle with a check and a non-disclosure agreement and a quiet understanding that no one was going to say anything more about it. She had been building cases for 24 years. She was very good at it. The thing about documenting evidence is that it requires patience, not the passive patience of waiting. The active patience of a person who is building something and understands that the building takes exactly as long as it takes, and rushing it produces a structure that will not hold. Naomi had activated the brooch that morning as a matter of habit. She did not expect to need it. She had expected a cup of coffee, a quiet 20 minutes, a sealed indictment, a good day. What she had instead was a man who had spent 11 years operating on the assumption that no one was watching him carefully enough to catch him in the act of being exactly who he was. That assumption had been built on years of evidence. 12 complaints, 9 exonerations signed by a friend, a system of informal protection so thoroughly embedded in the department that no one within it had ever been required to name it out loud. What Mercer had not calculated, what he could not have calculated, was that the woman sitting in the corner table at Birchwood Bakery that morning had spent 24 years learning to document exactly what he thought he could hide. She had done it in rooms where the stakes were higher than this one. Organized crime operations, political corruption, federal judges with friends in the right places. She had built cases against people who had far more protection than Dale Mercer and far more resources to defend themselves with and far more experience at making evidence disappear. She had won everyone, not because she was relentless, because she was patient, because she understood that a case built correctly does not need to be forced through. It walks through the door on its own. Because the truth, properly documented and properly timed, is heavier than anything you can put on the other side of the scale. She had learned that from 30 years of watching it happen, from building it herself case after case, document by document, timestamp by timestamp, from the particular satisfaction of watching a room go quiet in exactly the way that conference room went quiet when the recording began to play. That silence, that specific silence, was the sound of a case built correctly arriving at its destination. She had heard it before. She had known she would hear it again. What she had not expected was that the case would be her own. There is a particular cruelty in being treated as though you do not belong somewhere. It is different from being told directly that you are not wanted. The direct version is easier to name, easier to point at, easier to bring into a room and say this happened and this is what it means. The indirect version is different. It works through implication, through assumption, through the question asked before the greeting, through the space that opens between you and the other people in the room that no one acknowledges and everyone feels. Through a man in a police uniform looking at a woman sitting at a corner table in a bakery with a coffee and a scone and 51 minutes before a meeting and deciding that her presence required an explanation that her bearing her blazer, her quiet composure, had somehow failed to provide. Naomi Ellison had been navigating that version her entire life. She had developed over the years a way of holding it that did not allow it to consume her. She felt it. She acknowledged it. She did not pretend it was not happening. Then she put it where it needed to go and focused on what was in front of her. It was the same discipline her father had shown her at 14. The discipline of a person who has decided that the thing trying to diminish them is not going to get the space it is trying to occupy. the discipline of a person who has more important things to do. That morning in Birchwood Bakery, when Mercer stopped at her table and his shadow fell across her phone screen, she had felt the familiar weight of it. The particular weight of being looked at by someone who has already decided what you are before he has learned a single thing about you. She had held it. She had let it be what it was. And then she had put it where it needed to go and focused on what was in front of her, because she had work to do. Because the work was what mattered. Because 24 years had taught her that the best response to a man like Dale Mercer was not her anger, not her fear, not any of the things he was hoping to produce in her, but the specific, patient, methodical response of a woman who had spent 2 decades learning exactly how to make what happened next completely and permanently unavoidable. Patricia Greer arrived at the Harlow police station 4 minutes after Naomi's 2-word message. She was 52 years old. She had been the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia for 6 years. She had prosecuted 84 federal cases. She had lost a total of 0 nights of sleep over a single one of them. She was not a woman who lost her composure easily. She lost it in approximately 4 seconds. She took in the scene through the lobby glass. The handcuffs, the blazer, the badge wallet visible in its evidence bag on the counter, and she was already moving before she had finished processing it. She had known Naomi Ellison for 11 years. She had worked beside her in 2 of the largest federal corruption cases the Northern District had ever produced. She had watched her testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee with the patience and precision of someone who has decided that the only acceptable outcome is the correct one and is prepared to work until it arrives. She had never seen Naomi in handcuffs. She hoped never to see it again. But she understood as she pushed through the station doors with her credentials already extended what Naomi's 2-word message had meant. Not a distress signal, a summons. Come see what this man has just done. Come see it in real time, in its full detail, so that when this goes to a courtroom, your testimony about what you witnessed is precise and unimpeachable. She came. She saw. She stayed exactly where Naomi needed her to stay. Not intervening, not de-escalating, bearing witness, because that was what was needed. That was what the moment required. And Patricia Greer had spent 20 years learning to read what a moment required, and then providing exactly that. The sentencing happened on a Thursday in November. The trees on the courthouse square had finished their October turn. The leaves were mostly down, gathered in the gutters, brown and dry and entirely removed from the branches that had held them. The sky above Harlow was the particular gray of a morning that is cold without being dramatic about it. Inside the courthouse, the room was warm. Naomi sat in the front row of the public gallery with a folder open in her lap and her phone face down beside her. She was reading the next case. A utility company in central Georgia. A pattern of billing practices across 4 rural counties that had been quietly extracting money from low-income households for 11 years. A paper trail, a whistleblower. The beginning of a file that would take at her estimate 14 to 18 months to build into something actionable. She was reading, she was focused, she was already somewhere else. When the marshals brought Mercer and Polk into the room, she looked up briefly. She took in the weight they had lost, the suits that no longer fit, the particular quality of stillness that comes when the structures a person has built their identity on have been removed all at once, revealing whatever was underneath. She looked for a moment. Then she went back to reading, not because she was indifferent, because she was done with this one, because this case was complete. The file was closed. The consequences were in motion. The building on Caldwell Street was almost finished and would be open in 3 weeks. And there was another case. There was always another case, another file, another room somewhere in this country where the power was running in the wrong direction and someone needed a person prepared enough and patient enough to walk in and document exactly what was happening until the documentation was too complete to ignore. She was that person. She had been that person for 24 years. She intended to keep being that person for as long as she was able. She went back to reading the utility company file. Outside, the marshals read the sentences into the record. The court reporter's fingers moved. The camera's red light blinked. Naomi turned the page. Deja had not told anyone what she had done for 12 days. She had submitted the USB drive and the written statement and driven back to work and clocked in and made lattes and smiled at customers and closed up the bakery at 6 that evening and gone home to her apartment and made dinner and called her mother in Savannah and not mentioned a single word of it. Her mother asked how her day had been. She said fine, busy, the usual. She was not hiding it. She was not ashamed of it. She simply understood from some instinct she could not have named, but that she had been developing since she was old enough to understand how rooms worked and who was expected to be quiet in them. That this was a thing you did quietly and then stepped back from and let the people with the specific tools and training and authority do what they were equipped to do with what you had given them. She had done her part. She had done it thoroughly. She had done it without drama. 12 days later, an FBI agent came into the bakery at 11 in the morning and asked to speak with her. They sat at the corner table, the same table. The agent was thorough. She asked good questions. She listened to the answers without interrupting. She thanked Deja when they were done. Deja said, of course. She went back behind the counter and made a latte for the next customer, and thought briefly about the woman in the charcoal blazer who had looked up at the security camera before the handcuffs went on. The woman who had known before it started that someone needed to be watching. Deja had been watching. She had always been watching. She just had better tools now. She was 24 years old. She had a desk at the Mercer-Polk Center on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She had a stack of intake forms and a legal pad and the particular steady sense of purpose that comes to a person who has decided that looking away is not something they are going to do. Not anymore. Not again. Not ever. Margaret Osei had been sitting at that table for 40 years. Different tables, different rooms, different buildings, but the same essential position. The witness who was also the participant. The observer who was also the actor. The person at the edge of the thing that was happening who saw it clearly and then decided what to do with what they saw. She had been a federal public defender for 30 years. She had sat across from judges and prosecutors and arresting officers and listened to versions of the truth that bore various relationships to what had actually happened. She had learned over those 30 years to read the difference, to hear the particular cadence of an account constructed versus an account recalled, the subtle difference in the grammar of a person who is reporting what happened and a person who is managing what happened. She had heard both many times in many rooms. When Mercer stopped at Naomi's table that morning, Margaret Osei knew within 30 seconds what she was watching. She had pressed record because that was the correct thing to do, and she had spent 30 years learning what the correct thing was and doing it. She had submitted the footage through a former colleague because that was the appropriate channel, and she knew which channels were appropriate, and had built 30 years of relationships in those channels. She had sat at the window of the center on Caldwell Street every Friday morning since it opened and trained legal observers because that was useful work and she was capable of doing it and there was no good reason not to. She was 68 years old. She had, after 30 years of this work, one consistent and simple understanding of what the job required. You show up, you watch, you document, you use what you have to do what you can. And then you show up again the next week. That was it. That was the whole thing. She had been doing it for 30 years. She intended to keep doing it for as long as she was able. The scone at Birchwood was very good. The coffee was better. She was on the mornings when she did not have observers to train, simply a retired woman in her late 60s having breakfast in a bakery on Caldwell Street in the town where she had lived for 22 years. She was also always something else. A person who had decided a long time ago that looking away was not among the options available to her. The cameras were always on. She was always watching. That was not a burden. That was a choice she had made and had never had cause to regret. She hoped she never would. Raymond Polk had gone to the County Business Association dinner because he always went to the County Business Association dinner. It was a Thursday night event at the Harlow Country Club. 12 tables, white linen, the kind of salmon that costs more than the entire meal should. He had shaken hands with the county commissioner, with the president of the Suburban Business Association, with a state senator who had very carefully not mentioned Polk's name in any public statement for the past 5 weeks, and whose handshake communicated all of that without a word being spoken about any of it. Polk had ordered the salmon. He had finished 2 glasses of wine. He had given over the course of the evening 4 different versions of the breakdown in communication story to 4 different conversations at 4 different tables. By the time his phone buzzed on the tablecloth, he had almost convinced himself that the worst was genuinely behind him. He read the calendar notification. He set the phone face down. He picked up his wine glass. The log was in Discovery. Webb had already seen it. A welfare check before the stop. No jury convicts on a welfare check. He had gone home that night and slept well. That was the thing about the kind of certainty Polk carried. It was self-reinforcing. Every piece of evidence he encountered that seemed to support the story he had built made the story feel more solid. He did not know what he did not know. He did not know about the 51-page forensic analysis sitting in a sealed folder in Marcus Webb's office. He did not know about the microphone array calibrated to capture clean audio through 3/8 of an inch of standard interior glass. He did not know that the conversation he had with Mercer in his own office, with the blinds drawn and the body camera off and the door closed behind them, had been recorded by a device in a plastic evidence bag 11 feet away. He had gone to sleep certain. He had woken up certain. He had attended the deposition certain. He had remained certain until the moment Marcus Webb plugged in the USB drive and turned up the volume, and Raymond Polk heard his own voice fill a conference room 31 floors above the Atlanta skyline. That was when the certainty ended. Not gradually, not with warning, all at once. The way things end when they were built on something false, suddenly, completely, without any possibility of revision.